All right, I'm going to do this last part of the lecture really quickly because it's Thursday and we're running out of time. So we left off with the whole Red Scare. Make sure you read about Joseph McCarthy, HUAC, Alger Hiss, Whittaker Chambers, Rosenberg, Richard Nixon, Hollywood 10, why the Red Scare occurred, why it was bad, all that good stuff. Um, the next part of the chapter, the last part of chapter 36, is about Harry Truman at home. So Harry Truman's an interesting guy, follows Roosevelt, one of the most popular presidents ever. If you want to see a fantastic movie, see the movie Harry and the Hendersons, which is all about a Bigfoot that grows up with his family as they accidentally hit him with their car. Classic 1980s comedy. So Harry Truman is going to be the president of the United States. Killer Photoshop skills. And basically, he's going to have a very difficult time. Most of his attention is going to be initially ending World War II with regard to the war in Asia. Then you're going to have some problems. You're going to have demobilization occurring where basically the country is shifting from a war economy to one in which more consumer spending. Remember, World War II was really good for the economy. It ended the Great Depression. And what you have is you have this huge amount of people coming back, men coming back from all over the world, and defense spending is cut more than half, and therefore defense jobs go away. And so you have this kind of period of time where the economy is really kind of in a downward trend. You then have reconversion. Basically, all that means is you go from a wartime production economy to one of consumer goods. And really, what you're going to see is the Great Depression's over. Yes, there's a little dip at the beginning of the post World War II period, but the economy, and that's going to be a big theme in chapter 37, is going to be doing pretty well as a whole. The 1950s, especially, will be a decade of economic prosperity. A couple other things about Truman. GI Bill of Rights, also called the Readjustment Act of 1944, was actually passed before Truman takes office. And basically, this creates the GI Bill of Rights. What does that mean? That means all of the soldiers that come back, the veterans, and this still exists today, are provided for. They are given college loans. They could get help purchasing a home, starting a business, medical care, things like this, where the federal government is directly assisting those individuals who served in the United States. And it really has a huge impact in opening up home ownership for a number of soldiers who come back. It has a huge increase in terms of the numbers of students or young adults that go off to college. College graduation rates increase. And so things are going really well when it comes to the economy in this period of time. However, not if you're a worker. In fact, organized labor unions, remember during the New Deal, they were doing very well. They had the Wagner Act, 1935, which for the first time gives them protections from the federal government. Even before that, you had the National Recovery Act, which had a section protecting workers. So the New Deal had brought workers into the Democratic Party, but the problem for Harry Truman was he's dealing with a Republican Congress. And the Republican Congress, a big theme in Chapter 36, is them blocking Truman's domestic programs. Um, he had his own reform agenda called the Fair Deal, and he called for a bunch of different things, which I'll show you on one of the slides coming up. And he's going to have a very difficult time getting a lot done domestically. Um, the problem that occurs is you have some strikes taking place. You have Republicans not very favorable to the position of organized labor. And basically, what the Taft Hartley Act does, It's also known as the Labor Management Relations Act. It bans closed shop, which basically means you have to join a union before you're hired, so that it makes that illegal. So you have an option there. It outlaws some forms of boycotts. Um, Union officials have had to sign oaths declaring that they were not communist, and it really kind of hurts labor union movement in the United States. Truman does veto it, but because of Republican majorities in Congress, his veto is uh, overruled by Congress. So Truman has very difficult time, and Taft-Hartley is an act designed to weaken the position of labor unions.
Cool.
One of the things that Truman actually does do that is pretty impressive is he creates a President's Committee on Civil Rights. The first time this was ever done, this is not something that is very popular. In fact, it's going to cost him huge support in the South, especially. And the report comes out in 1947 called To Secure These Rights, and in it basically calls for federal laws against lynching, which had been something that had been pressed on since the NAACP was founded. During Franklin Roosevelt, he ignored that because he didn't want to lose his New Deal coalition. It talked about ending segregation in the military. And Truman, in February 1948, and you could see this right here, executive order, President Truman wipes out segregation in armed forces. This is huge. This was bitterly opposed by many different people, both Republicans and Democrats, especially Southerners. The executive order basically desegregated the military. For the first time, the military is now desegregated. It is the first step towards desegregation with regard to the federal government. And some make comparisons to the current battles over Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Not going to get into that, but it's going to have huge consequences for Truman. In fact, Southern Democrats are going to leave the party. And the Southern Democrats in 1948, when Truman is running for his election, uh, form their own party called the Dixiecrats. And they're headed by this man, Strom Thurmond, who basically they fly the banner of state rights, but really it was a response to the policies of Truman with regard to civil rights, especially. So Truman's position when it came to civil rights, even though it was a very moderate position, he wasn't like, directly attacking every problem, uh, alienated him amongst his own party and amongst some Americans. So you're going to have the Dixiecrat Party. Make sure you read about them and understand what they're all about. 1948, the election's a really interesting one. The election takes place. No one thought Truman had a chance to win. His approval ratings were extremely low. There were strikes, and the economy was still kind of the situation. Truman was not very popular. Republicans had control of Congress, and in fact, there was a famous uh, kind of quote that people would say: "To err is Truman," instead of human. Awkward waiting for you to laugh even via the online lectures. So no one thought he was going to win. The party's divided. In fact, if you take a look at the results, the Dixiecrats, Strom Thurmond takes states in the South. There's also another party, the Progressive Party, who runs, and you see in this political cartoon Truman looking at the polls. What's the use of going through with the election? Um, Everyone counted Truman out. And in the election of 1948, very famous photo, Truman defies the political odds and defeats the Republican candidate Dewey. And this is actually a really famous picture of Truman holding up the newspaper proclaiming that Dewey had won the election. That was already printed prior to the final totals being announced. So pretty interesting. Make sure you read about that, the Dixiecrats and whatnot. There it is one more time. Truman with his little smile. Truman, though, in his second term, his second official term, is going to have a very difficult time. Like I said, he's going to have a program called the Fair Deal. A lot of different things he's going to try to get done. In fact, at his State of the Union address in 1949, when he is taking office, he announces his Fair Deal. And he wants to do a lot of things. He wants to increase the minimum wage. He wants to increase Social Security benefits, um, provide low-income housing, increase the TVA, get rid of slums and other problems. And nearly all of that is opposed, not only by Republicans but also Southern Democrats. Here you got Truman trying to throw the donkey, the Democratic donkey, into the bathwater. It's not having it. He is going to get some of these things, but he's going to lose on a lot more. So these goals were ultimately succeeded in some ways. Minimum wage does increase. He does increase Social Security benefits. But when it comes to getting major civil rights legislation pushed forward, rejected. He actually proposed national health insurance, a form of it, and it was rejected. So the whole, Obamacare, and all that stuff, that is nothing new. We've been battling this over and over again. He tried to get Taft-Hartley repealed. No luck. Federal aid to education. A lot of his domestic programs, the Fair Deal, did not gain momentum. And Truman is a big part of this period of time. This foreign policy stuff is going to take center stage. 1949, keep in mind, China, the atomic bomb. 1950, Korea, the broadening of the war. There's a lot of things that Truman had to deal with. And even though he was often criticized in this period of time, you could see kind of Truman crashing into different things, different errors that he supposedly made, Korea blundering, ultimatum to Stalin, so on and so forth. Um, he is going to do, most historians look back and say, well, he kept us out of World War III. He stood firm at the Berlin airlift by ordering it and avoiding a bigger conflict. He kept the Korean War limited so China would not ultimately continue to attack us. But domestically, he was met by a lot of problems. So read about domestically Truman's, successes and more failures than successes. Foreign policy, though, containment did succeed in Europe. It did succeed in Korea, not in China. So to what extent was Truman a successful president? They won't ask a question like that, but make sure you can answer questions about Truman's presidency, about the role of the government, the difference between the Fair Deal and the New Deal, and so on and so forth. All right, sorry this lecture was really, 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 really rambly. Probably, that's not even a word, but do your IDs, do your reading notes, study, meet with your groups. You are having a free response, multiple choice test, and your work is due on Monday. Happy Easter. If you don't celebrate Easter, happy whatever day you're watching this. 1952, next chapter. Goodbye, Truman. Hello. One of our first and only bald presidents, Dwight.